Drivers, start your engines!
Pick the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweaty working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sprinklers on, alright. Well,
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Network. Welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour, or perhaps more, as we dig into everything racing. Before we get into that, let me introduce you to the panel. With me tonight, Mr. Gray Warren. Gray, how are you?
Good evening, sir. How you doing?
All right, Gray is from Richard Childress Motorsports. Seth Eggert also in the house. Seth, the NASCAR correspondent for Motorsports Tribune. Seth, how are you?
I'm doing good.
All right, Richard Youden, also from Richard Childress Motorsports. Richard, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Hope everybody else is doing well.
All right, then I've got the Giggle brothers, who are working on no sleep after spending a weekend at Watkins, Glen. Joey Barnes and Christopher DeHarde. Joey, who writes for IndyCar.com and is the managing editor at Motorsports Tribune. Joey, how are you?
I'm good until you said Giggle Brothers.
Well, hey, man, you know what? And Christopher DeHarde, who we just woke up to get him on the show. Chris, brew a cup of coffee. Join us. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Got 4 hours of sleep last night, so that's why I had to sleep again after being at work at 7 a.m. That's the life, though.
All right. Well, you guys spent your weekend at Watkins Glen. Seth, where did you spend your weekend? Were you over at a Cars event, or?
No, the next Cars event is South Boston. I want to say in about 2 or 3 weeks it's their season finale.
All right, great. South Boston's a beautiful speedway down in Virginia, yeah. So I'll be looking forward to hearing from that. But now, Gray, you spent your weekend at Darlington for the Southern 500, and where we saw.
Yes, I did.
Yes, we saw Martin Truex run a great race. For a while, it looked like it was the Martin and Kyle show, with Kyle Larson and Martin Truex. Those guys were, but at the end of the day, Martin was a cut tire. Denny Hamlin took the win. For the moment, more on that later. But Gray, you were down there at the racetrack. You've down there for, I believe, is it your 48th consecutive?
48th consecutive Southern 500.
Southern 500. Yes, absolutely. You've been going there since I was 2. And you've been going there since before the rest of the guys on the panel were born. So, but Greg, give us your impressions from Darlington, because I just think they do a great job with what they've been doing here lately. So I'm just going to throw it to you and let you talk about the Southern 500 for a bit.
Well, for me, Darlington is a lot like Indy is for a lot of you guys. It never disappoints. It's something I look forward to every year. Going there is to me, it's the best racetrack in NASCAR. Always puts on a good show. It's old. It's full of tradition. The racetrack was designed and built in 1950 for cars that ran those speeds back in the day. It's gone through one revamp after the '68 race. It was some revamping was done, but it still holds its character and has been that way. It's very narrow. It's very treacherous. It's very abrasive, and it's a driver's track. And you usually will see one of the better races of the year. And again, to me, Sunday night was probably one of the better races. You're right. Kevin Harvick started on the pole. He's been the master of Darlington for the last several years. Should have probably won 2 in a row, and coming in this one, won 3 in a row. But there again, you've got to race the track, and you got to have a little bit of luck, at the end too. But good race for a lot of guys, and it's typical Darlington in that guys will go out and get out to a little bit of a lead, and then their tires will wear. They'll have some degradation on the tires, and they'll come back to the field a little bit, and you'll see guys overtake them. I believe there was 20 lead changes among 8 drivers during the course of the race. The last 102 laps were run caution-free, which in itself, a lot of times at Darlington, is quite unusual. But that probably led to some of the drama late in the race. Denny Hamlin pitted later than the other cars, and in fact had trouble when he did make that pit stop. When he came back on the track, he was some 20 seconds behind the leader, Martin Truex. And through the last stint, he began to run down Truex, had Kyle Busch in tow, and those 2 cars cut through the field like a hot knife through butter. It was fun to watch. Darlington's always fun to watch the cars. It's so narrow. Traffic is always an issue and always a problem. And to watch those cars cut through traffic and track the leader down. He caught, at one time with about 20 laps to go or so, I heard over the scanner, I heard Truex's crew chief tell him if he maintained his current pace, he would win by 2 seconds. Well, obviously, as the tires wear down, he couldn't maintain that pace. And with about 5 to go, Denny pulled in within a second of him and really closed the lap as the two approached some traffic. Truex's car was getting to be a handful, and he was slipping and sliding through the corners. And then with about 2 to go, he slipped up and hit the fence. I don't know which happened first, whether the tire blew or the tire blew after he got into the fence, but his tires were pretty much worn out, and it was a foregone conclusion that Denny was going to catch him. And Denny made the pass with 2 laps to go, and Truex limped around on his flat tire, and it was able to finish 8th. And Kyle Busch finished 2 seconds behind Denny. But a great night, just a really good race with a lot of drama, a lot of comings and goings throughout the race. We had guys like Kyle Larson. He had his share of time at the front. Harvick did. Harvick's car faded somewhat during the race, and he never could get the handle back on it. Had some good runs, the 2 RCR cars. Austin Dillon got a good solid top 5 finish. I believe Ryan Newman got a 7th or 8th out of it. And so going into the last race, we've got one more shot for some of the guys to win it. It was a disappointing run for Clint Boyer. He went into that race really needing a win, and was looking forward to it. And he was the first car out, having engine failure with about 18 laps to go. Some other notables: Dale Jr. had a lackluster evening, and he didn't really have a good night. Just kind of floundered in mid-pack most of the night. But it was a good show again. Like you said, the throwback cars add a lot of interest to it. Terrific crowd on hand. The front stretch was completely full, and the back stretch was about 3/4 to 7/8 full. So the folks at Darlington have got to be really, really tickled about that. But I did see one interesting tidbit today when I was going through some of the notes on the race. The race garnered probably a 1.6 on the TV rating scale, which it was shown on NBC SN, and that's opposed to the last 2 years when it garnered almost a 3.6 1 year and a 2.8 or something the following year. And it just goes, I can't understand why NASCAR and NBC wouldn't agree to put that race, since it's one of the so-called majors, wouldn't put that race on network NBC. I think that just tends to lower TV ratings, that they're already struggling for anyway. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, some of the races that are not on the networks, I don't understand why they're not. and some of them that are on the networks, I don't understand why they are. I guess it's all in the intricacies of the television package, and who's paying for what and this and that. Especially when you consider, Darlington and what it means to the sport, how long it's been around. That should be a network one. Absolutely, I agree. Seth, what do you think?
I think it should be a network one. I do definitely agree with that. But at the same time, not every sport has their major on a network, or all of their majors anyway on a network. So I can see the argument both ways. I just do want to make one note. Ford and particularly Roush Fenway, they had a poor performance at Darlington, like Ray said. Trevor Bayne cut a tire like 6 laps in. Stenhouse about 28 laps in. Yeah. And Joey had an engine issue all day whenever he would flip the switch to turn the engine off to save fuel. When he went to turn it back on, he had to recycle the ECU.
And Keselowski he led a few laps in the race and ran near the front and pretty much ran in the top 7 or 8 cars all night long, but just did not have the speed to challenge the front runners during the course of the evening. But I guess the big news coming out of Darlington was that it was announced today about 4 o'clock that Denny Hamlin's win in the number 11 Joe Gibbs Toyota was encumbered. After the cars went back to Charlotte and went through the inspection process on Tuesday morning, it was discovered, I believe they call that a L1 level penalty, and it was discovered that there were some discrepancies with the way the trailing arm mounts to the rear end housing, and of course that brought about the encumbered win. And Seth can tell us a little bit more about the ramifications of it, or what he loses. I believe it's yeah. Go ahead, Seth.
Well, he loses his crew chief Mike Wheeler for 2 weeks, Richmond and Chicagoland. He loses 25 driver points, 25 owner points. He loses the benefit of the 5 playoff points he earned with the win, which sets him back slightly. Although we'll get to it in a little bit, Martin Truex Jr., he is going to have the benefit of 52 playoff points compared to Hamlin's, what would have been, I think, 14 is now 9. Yeah. Just to put that into perspective.
And by far and away, Truex has got the most playoff points than anyone. Who I haven't seen that chart, but who ranks second behind Truex?
Kyle Larson
Kyle
with
Larson,
32.
Believe, yeah.
You're 32 or 30. It's something like that.
Yeah, But based on the fact that the 78 car has by far and away been the dominant car all year in number of wins and number of stage wins. I tell you, you gotta give it to Truex, because those guys show up every week and run hard as they can and go to the front. I mean, they're not laying back. You really, if you were looking at, we can debate this, but under the old formats, they would be far and away the leader in points, at this juncture in the season. But that's a different story. But
yeah. And now Martin Truex is the first ever regular season champion for NASCAR,
correct,
whatever that means. That's kind of a new honor. Truex was kind of happy to have it, but I want to get back to the encumbered win, and I know my good friend Richard has some deep thoughts on this. So, Richard, I want you. You've spent your career working in racing. You've worked over in Europe, and you've worked over here in the States, and you worked in NASCAR for a while. So you've seen things from both ends of the spectrum. And now, what are your thoughts on these encumbered wins, and how does this work, and how does this affect fans that pay for the race?
I mean, my opinion is it makes a mockery of the whole thing. It really does. You have a race that is 3.5, 4, even sometimes longer in some cases, and the guy that crosses the line first and gets all the glory, at the end of the day, he doesn't deserve it. Now, that's not to say cheating and what's the word? Shenanigans don't go on within NASCAR. Of course they do. They're going with any motorsport, and I'm sure Gray's got some stories, from back in the day. But now the sport is so technical and so advanced, and to the average fan, to look at some of the light scanning and the GPS systems that they use to measure these cars, they are state of the art. They wouldn't be out of place at NASA or somebody like that. And you have these tools, and you have a rule book, and then you've basically turned around and said, okay, the 11 car cheated. So what do we do? How do we punish somebody who cheats? And they haven't really punished them. I mean, they may have done from a financial point of view, and in the grand scheme of things, there may be a punishment there. But the fans don't see that. They don't see the sort of, you could argue that from the amount of TV coverage that Hamlin got during the weekend, they will have earned far more money through sponsorship than they lost through the penalty. Going back to when I first got involved in motorsport back in 2005, when I was working for BAR Honda, some of you may remember there was an issue with the fuel cell, and they were actually banned for 2 races. One of them being Monaco. I think the other one was Spain, if I remember. I mean, to miss Monaco is like missing the Daytona 500 or the Indy 500 or something like that for one of the teams over here. I mean, it's a huge, huge penalty. And these you see post-race and pre-race. NASCAR have clamped down on this a lot. There was a lot of weaving going on pre-race, and that was designed to shift components within the car, and especially the rear suspension, to help generate skew or lateral turn within the car. And then also post-race, we've all seen it, we all know the stories, when Jimmy Johnson won a race and was told, remember your post-race procedure or something along those lines on the radio. And they've also stopped a lot of cars, driving up against the wall on pit road and burning the back of the car down, because that destroys parts of the suspension and can hide things that were necessarily not in the spirit of the rules. And sometimes you see guys coming down pit road, and they'll, at the end of the race, they'll fly down there far faster than they need to and slam on the brakes as hard as they can. Again, designed to shift components within the car to reset their location. And it's a very, very difficult thing. And I think one of the problems that NASCAR has, and I understand why they do it, they have very, very little data acquisition within these cars. Basically, all they have are engine parameters. So throttle position, air temp, barometric pressure. They have braking pressure as well. Just things for engine operation. They don't have any real performance logging capability. Now, they could easily resolve this by putting sensors on the car that will detect excessive skew and excessive lateral movement within the housing of the car. And,
at speed,
But then that's at a cost. And then NASCAR will turn around and say, well, we don't want to have teams to have access to this data because that's not what NASCAR is all about. But there is a solution there. There is the solution. They can download all the data from the ECU and look at it instantly and say, well, look, you had too much lateral movement in your rear housing, set a limit, and if you go over it consistently and there's not a valid reason for it, you bang to rights. And they've got to mature a little bit and realize that, and I would say this is an electronics engineer and a data acquisition engineer, these data loggers are not scary things. Every team has them because they'll go testing, and when they go testing, the car's full of sensors, and so it already exists. And it's not the most expensive stuff in the world.
Yeah.
Your ECU, the engine management system, that can already do it. So I think they've got to look at that quite closely, because otherwise it's going to get out of hand.
Richard, there's not a bigger purist in the room than I am about NASCAR and the way, and a traditionalist. But I agree with you. It's time NASCAR has got to do something. This encumbered win is not a good thing. We've never had disqualifications in the Cup Series, but I think it's time now that NASCAR is going to have to do something to eliminate all this. Cheating is the very culture is the culture of NASCAR. It has been since day one. It's accepted. It's accepted in the shops, and it's what the guys do. It's what the guys sit around and think about all day long, all year long, trying to come up with tricks and things. And I've been a part of it all my career. I've been with teams that have been fined. I've been with teams. I was at Daytona one year when we were taken off the track and could not get back on the track until we had our people back at our headquarters in High Point wire NASCAR $50,000 in fine money before we could get back on the track. So I've been a part of a lot of these things, and I'll tell you, we looked at it as a badge of honor. And a point of pride, that when we did these things. And I've seen some things go along, and we looked at it as ingenuity and things like that. And some of the things that we were involved in over the years are the reason the rule book is about 4 times thicker than it was back when I started. But you're right, Richard. It's got to stop, and it does give NASCAR a bad look for the fans, and particularly for a newer breed of fans that we're trying to attract into the sport, and it's got to be cleaned up.
I think one last comment from me on this is, I think an area that NASCAR can look at, and again they have to understand that the sport and engineering in general is evolving, and the world around us is evolving. One of the reasons why these shenanigans go on, for want of a better word, is that the rule book is so tightly written. And I understand, that their attitude of, well, if we allow teams, we don't want teams spending Formula One-esque numbers on, R&D and developing areas of the car that we leave open. But if you leave engineers and teams areas that they can work on, then these things are less likely to happen, because they can actually not necessarily find loopholes, but push areas that are more open, and allows teams to engineer solutions. I mean, to a greater extent, these companies now are not race teams; they're engineering teams. And
manufacturing entities.
Yeah, they are manufacturers, and there are car manufacturers. I know of at least 2 in the UK that do not make as many chassis a year as Richard Childress Racing, and these guys are manufacturers. But they need to allow engineers to do what they want to do, and give them a legal area to say, look, you can push this area, you can push that area, and and open it up and allow them a little bit of maneuverability, which will, has the potential to engage the fans and get fans on board and understand, because they don't, a fan who looks at this penalty report, they don't have a clue what it's about. They don't know what teams are trying to do. But if you can open it up to an area that is a little bit more open and maybe a little more visual, I think there's potential there to remove some of this silliness.
Go ahead.
You think it's a little funny that it's Joe Gibbs Racing that gets nailed with the encumberment, because it is Joe Gibbs and the Toyota group that found how to swivel the back end of the car with the sway bar last year. And NASCAR for a long time couldn't figure out what was going on with the locking placement there. But I honestly, and this is the perfect example to use, is Denny Hamlin, because he has a win earlier in the year that qualifies him for the playoffs, and this one, obviously, the points don't count, it's encumbered, whereas Joey Logano, his only win is encumbered, so he's not in the playoffs yet. I personally, considering the way the playoffs still work, if I remember right, because they keep changing this thing, if you win one of the first 3 races in the playoffs, it qualifies you for the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. I'm personally okay with saying, okay, well, you want to do an encumbered finish. Well, the crew chief and the driver is disqualified for the first race of the next round. So disqualified for Chicagoland and would have to win to qualify for the next round in one of the next two races that follows. If you want to really make a statement on a severe penalty, and hey, you get a chance to see, who you got in the works on the young driver and young crew chief program at the same time. It's not ideal. It's not the perfect scenario, but you know what? That's a hell of a way to stick it to these drivers and teams that go beyond this, and it's a great way for NASCAR to actually put their foot down and for something to actually mean something. I mean, this means nothing. Denny Hamlin's already in the playoffs, so.
Well,
that trophy still looks good on his mantelpiece.
Exactly.
Bigger than that, and of course, and to a degree, Denny Hamlin is going to go start the playoffs with one hand tied behind his back, in that he loses his crew chief for the first round of the playoffs. So that's somewhat of a hindrance to his team. Somewhat, I'll say.
I don't think it is these days. The communication.
The depth they got in their team is so great.
You look at when the 77 car recently lost their crew chief. I mean, they almost went. I can't remember which race it was now, but they almost went and won the thing. I mean, the actual guy who was an interim crew chief there, James Smalls, he used to be a race engineer at Richard Childress Racing. I mean, these guys are so in tune, and the communication links are so good these days between the shop and the track that suspending a crew chief is, But the only thing you can do is, you can't do anything. You really can't stop it.
Yeah, the bigger picture is, and I agree. I think now disqualification is because you actually erase it from the record book. You erase a major win. And I tell you, Southern 500 is a big win in any driver's resume. And if you were to erase that, take that away, and give that win to the second place guy, even though he didn't take the checkered flag, today, he still goes home. He gets the money. He gets the check. He goes in the record book as the winner of the 68th Southern 500 because his car was legal. I think that will get the attention of these teams more than anything, because that's what means. That you're not taking the win away, and you're not erasing anything in the record book. It'd be the same thing. I mean, the biggest race in the world, the Indy 500, the most prestigious race in the world. Suppose they in post race tech, they find the winner and they take that win away.
Happened in 1981.
Yeah,
but then they gave it back to him. Gave him back to him 5 months later in a courtroom.
Yeah, that was a mess.
It's just a mess.
Between Bobby Unser and that
Mario,
whole deal. That was a mess, and that was a black eye for them. That I'm sure that hindsight being 2020, they never want to do that again. NASCAR needs to go ahead and in the off season, put rules in place and say, okay, we're tired of messing with you boys. Here's what's going to happen. Your car's not legal. At the end of the day, we're going to take the race from you. And they start taking Daytona 500s and World 600s and Brickyard 400s and Southern 500s away from these guys. They'll get the attention.
Yeah, but see, the precedent was already set at Homestead a couple of years ago when you had the four drivers in the championship battling for the top four spots, and they were clearing everybody by a mile. Like, we understand that Homestead, the last race of the season, the championship race, there's a little bit more leadway for those top four cars because they're not going to take a championship away.
You saw that last year with Jimmy Johnson, didn't you? My understanding of the situation was the car passed Tech. They then, I think he qualified sixth or something for that race. Anyway, as the cars were lined up in pit road, one of the NASCAR inspectors, that car doesn't look quite right, goes back through Tech and it fails. Now, Hendrick's standpoint is, well, we've passed, so we've got to be able to start where we are. NASCAR's point of view is, well, no, you've done something to the car, you've modified something, it's now illegal. And Hendrick knew that they can't throw Jimmy Johnson out of the race. Imagine what would have happened if they turned around and said, well, the car's illegal, Jimmy Johnson's not allowed to race.
Yeah.
They would have been, the stands would have emptied. So they let him start last, but they kept the car in an illegal configuration. Right. And he went and won the race.
And I know what you're talking about, Joey, several years ago when when the 4 cars that were the 4 finalists in the chase, they were far and away head and shoulders above everybody else and ran away. But
that was the second year. That was the second year of the chase.
But there again, they knew the precedent was NASCAR's not going to throw us out. We're racing for the championship. We are essentially the show. That's why I'm saying NASCAR has got to come in, and they've got to get their own house in order and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then you will eliminate. You'll start to eliminate that very issue we're talking about. The cars will have to be legal, and here you go. You were illegal in pre-race tech. You damn well better be legal when we take you back to Concord on Tuesday morning and tear you down.
Yeah, just all we want out of them is consistency. I mean, That's it. I mean, and we don't get it.
Well, and that's what I say. NASCAR has dug their own grave on that side of the issue. But if NASCAR wants to do away with this and kind of get some credibility, they're going to have to come up with something that's a punishment for doing these that gets their attention, and that's got to be disqualification in any form of motorsports. I mean, you go to Saturday night dirt track race, and if you don't pass tech, you're disqualified. And the second place guy, if he doesn't pass muster either, then the third place guy ends up with the trophy and the money for the win. And then it's done at every short track across the country. And I believe it's time now that NASCAR steps up and makes it the norm on the Cup circuit. And I don't recall an issue. Richard can allude to it in Formula One, but I don't recall anything in IndyCar. Joey and Chris, you can talk about that. But have we ever had a situation like that in IndyCar?
4-day at Milwaukee, if I remember right, a couple of years ago. I forgot how they handled it, to be honest with you, just because it feels like it's been forever. But
they took away a couple of points, I think it was, and fined him a small amount. What happened was he was a couple of pounds underweight, but really the amount that he was underweight, I asked one of the KV racing guys how much they were underweight. The amount of rubber that he burned off of the tires that he picked up after the race and about a couple of gallons of gas were all that he was underweight because he did a nice long post-race burnout after he won at Milwaukee.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of a traditional NASCAR way of doing things. You win even though you're not quite up to standards. The archaic way was to take away points in a lot of ways. I mean, the only thing that was the most severe thing that we ever saw in NASCAR for a long time was the Mark Martin, Dale Earnhardt Sr. Fiasco. I think it was Mark Martin's carburetor, something like that, way back in the early 90s.
And that was at Richmond, second race of the year. Yep. And basically that's still disputed by people to this day. It was real vague and thing, but in other words, the spacer, instead of just being dropping down over the carburetor studs and metal, they had welded the spacer to the intake manifold, and so it was just NASCAR decided it was illegal, and their interpretation of the rules. And I think I forget how many points Martin was docked, but it was significant enough that it was the difference in the championship that particular year. But I think all sanctioning bodies for credibility now with the new fan base, and like I think someone mentioned earlier, the media coverage now is so much greater. It's more eyeballs on things. It's more people are looking at it. Back in the day when these old rules were written, like the NASCAR, it was basically you didn't have a large TV audience. The most of your audience was in the stands, and that was Bill France's way of, we want our fans to leave the racetrack, seeing the winner take the checkered flag. And but I don't think those things apply anymore.
No, I absolutely agree. Yeah, that this day and age, information is instant. And if they actually disqualify some guys, we may see maybe a little curtailing on the skirting the rules, and maybe some guys just try to win legal. So I don't know.
Well,
Here's a quick question for you. Sorry,
Yeah.
here's a very quick question for you, Gray. If a team created in NASCAR a perfectly legal car, where would they finish the race?
They would not, in this day and time, with the current climate, they probably wouldn't even be competitive.
No.
Because they really wouldn't be competitive. You have got to stretch. You've got to stretch the rules. You've got to. There's an old saying, cheat to compete, but and like I said, it's part of the culture in our sport, and it's stretching the rule book and the rules as far as you can. It's why we do the things we do and put the time in the templates each week, making them fit, and do everything we can do, taking it right up to the edge. That what we think we can get away with, and we can argue the point and get that car to the racetrack. And it's not only us; it's the other 40 competitors in the garage area are doing the same thing to some degree. Guys stay awake at night looking for tricks and to make these cars work and to gain that advantage each and every week. And you're right, Richard. If you took a perfectly legal car to the racetrack, I don't even think you'd be competitive.
Man, that's a strong statement, man. But you're probably absolutely right. So,
Well, that's what I'm saying. NASCAR's got to close up some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, as a sanctioning body, they need to clamp down and then just maybe change that culture.
Well,
because if all 40 cars were legal, then all 40 cars would be competitive. With one another. You know what I'm saying?
And I tell you another thing too, and I'm briefly, so I know we need to move on to other things, but in this current financial climate with things, everybody's looking at their dollars. NASCAR's doing the same thing. NASCAR has cut the number of inspectors that are at the racetrack by a bunch. These inspectors are worked hard, it's particularly on these weekends where both the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series are at the same track. These guys are running back and forth between the garages. NASCAR has nowhere near the inspection force that they had 5-6 years ago, and they're cutting their costs back just as like the teams are trying to too. But there again, it's a crazy situation, like Richard alluded to earlier in the show. They're coming up with rules that are costing the teams more money, but they are cutting back on their inspection forces at the racetrack too. Now, taking them to Concord on Tuesday is an entirely different thing, because that's a closed environment. It's very small, and they have an unlimited amount of time to do that inspection. But inspections at the track are as thorough as they can be, and they're using technology to try to do it. But they have less people there doing the inspections.
All right, so with that said, let's talk about Richmond. Richmond is the last race before the playoffs begin. We got a couple guys in desperate need of a win. Logano, we had mentioned, his one and only win is encumbered. He's a couple spots below the cut line. Clint Boyer's looking for a win to get in there. So was Jamie McMurray's right on the cusp. Matt Kenseth. Let's go ahead and let's go around the table and make some picks for Richmond. I'm going to start with you, Christopher, because you've been so quiet.
I figured Dale Jr. gets the call again.
Okay, all right. Seth, you could be next.
Well, Chris took somebody I was considering, so...
Yay.
Yay.
I am going to go with Suarez. I'd say he sticks it to Subway with some donuts in Victory Lane.
You know what? That'd be funny. Good old Daniel Suarez. Okay.
And for those who didn't catch the story, Subway pulled out of sponsoring Suarez and Gibbs because of a segment he did for NBC at New Hampshire, passing out donuts to race fans.
Right, because
they were Dunkin' Donuts,
right,
Brand X.
And Subway has a breakfast menu now, this day and age, and they do not like their spokesman, per se, peddling a competitor's products. So, whatever.
But apparently having
NBC's
having Jared Fogle on there was good enough for them. So, they can pound sand over this.
And in NBC's and in Schwartz's defense, NBC, one of their corporate sponsors is Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah. So,
and it was an NBC segment. So,
I think the whole thing is silly. And if you ask me, the real reason is deeper than that. And I think Subway put their money on Carl Edwards, and they didn't want a Suarez guy there. So, it is what it is. Subway wanted out somewhere, and they did. But to my friend Joey's point, this is just really side news that probably doesn't even need to be mentioned. So, with that being said, Gray, you've got the next pick for Richmond.
Oh wow, I'm going to go with the 18. I think he usually runs pretty strong there at Richmond. I think he'll get the win.
Absolutely, and Richard.
Joe Logano.
Well, you just stole mine. I was going to say Joey Logano won in Richmond earlier.
Exactly.
This year,
do the same thing.
Encumbered.
Get away with this time.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be neat if he, his encumbered win is keeping out of the chase, and he had a straight up, more or less unencumbered win to get him into the chase. So, I'm trying to think who you guys left me. I'll go with Jamie McMurray. There's another guy, who's really run pretty strong all year, right on the cusp of making it in. And you know what? I really dug that livery he had at Darlington. It was the old, the original McDonald's when they first got into the sport. And some of you guys that know me know I worked in McDonald's marketing at the time when we had Hutch Strickland and then Jimmy Spencer in that car with that exact, the red livery.
You talking about the one car at Darlington?
Well, yeah, it was, but the livery was from the old 27 Junior Johnson car.
Nope. The old livery was from the number 1 Hawaiian Tropic car that David Pearson won the 1980 Southern 500 in.
Right, but the McDonald's logos on the car were...
Oh, had the old style McDonald's logo.
Yeah, the old style McDonald's logo, right from the old Hutch Strickland and Jimmy Spencer cars that back when I worked in marketing for McDonald's, we had that, and we had a Texas Pete on the back quarter panel. So I mean, it was a little combination of both. But I thought it was beautiful cars. Either way, I'm gonna say Jamie McMurray is going to take a win for Chip Ganassi and get himself in the playoffs, along with his teammate who has done so well this year. So, with that being said,
Joey's got a pick.
No, Joey doesn't.
Thanks.
Joey doesn't get a pick.
Thanks, Gray.
Joey, I'm sorry I skipped it. Joey, who do you like? Kevin Harvick?
I actually like this race to probably get rained out with the weather that's going to be hitting the East Coast. But
that's true.
I tell you, I think that Kurt Busch, I mean, he's just really good at Richmond. And this Ford package is pretty good at Richmond, too. So I'm going to go Kurt Busch.
Good pick. And a little bit of truck racing news. I know, Seth, you want to mention that up in, up there in Mosport. What do they call it now?
Yes.
Canadian
Tire Motorsport Park.
Yeah, I like to call it Mosport because that's where it was when I raced the Formula V there years ago. But, Austin Cindric, son of Tim Cindric, drives for Brad Keselowski, did a little, was it a bump and run or a dump and run?
Depends on who you ask.
Well, if you ask Kaz, it was a dump and run. Either way, there are not a lot of folks happy with Austin Cindric right now. But Austin's pretty happy to take his first truck win. So, Seth, what are your thoughts on the Canadian Motorsports Park? Well,
it was a good race overall. Honestly, I think that Austin Cindric, to a certain point, did what he had to do. It took him until the white flag to actually catch Kaz Gralla, and he had 2, maybe 3 passing opportunities. Turn 5, where he ran Gralla and spun Gralla out. Turn 7 or 8, which are at the end of the back straightaway, and then the final turn where we've seen wreck after wreck after wreck. Chase Elliott and Austin Dillon, John Hunter Nemechek and Cole Custer last year. So it was bound to happen. Just where on the track was anybody's guess. And Austin said it himself when he got out of the truck. With the way the playoff system is, he felt like he was backed into this corner and that he had to do what he did. Granted, he was somewhat defending himself, but at the same time, he was kind of telling the truth. He won also in a throwback truck, too, that Brad had wrapped. Him, Chase Briscoe, they were both running throwback trucks. And John Hunter Nemechek also ran throwback truck to Ron Fellows, who owns the track now. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That is kind of cool, yeah. You know, go Ron.
I'm sorry if I'm Kev Strala, I'm beating somebody's ass.
Yeah. But shoot, Ron Fellows is one of the original NASCAR road course ringers. Yeah, so gotta love that guy. So yeah, you know, good weekend for Austin Cindric. You know, so maybe when you have a little controversy, your name is in the news. So good for Austin. Good for Brad Keselowski Truck Racing before they shut down the operation at the end of the season. So, but let's move on to IndyCar. Let's talk about Watkins Glen. We wrapped up the Mazda Road to Indy Series there, and we had the penultimate race of the Verizon IndyCar Series. Joseph Newgarden. We had talked about this is his championship to lose, and he certainly took a step towards that with a mistake coming out of pit road. He's not put himself out of it by any stretch of the imagination, but he really tightened the points battle up. But I'm going to throw it over to you, Chris and Joey. You guys spent the weekend at Watkins Glen, so just going to let you two just talk about it and just fill us in.
I mean, Rossi, in qualifying, he was just blazing, got the pole. Come race time, we thought, as did everybody that was around the sport, about the fact that this was probably going to be rain affected. So even IndyCar had all the teams start on wet tires and, start the race, wet tires. Next thing you know, lap one, the track's dry enough to where all these guys are swarming pit road. And after everything got cycled out, we saw kind of an influx of things happening at the front of the field. But, aside from James Hinchcliffe's early exit on lap 5, everything started to bounce the right way. Spencer Pigot led his first laps due to all that weird strategy going on. So he led his first IndyCar laps of his career. So that was good for him. But Rossi was just a rocket ship. He'd sit there and go to the front. If this thing involves a wreath or a fuel issue, because he had a fuel nozzle issue happen, he seems to do a good job winning races. So he talked about how it's fitting that he won his first pole at Watkins Glen, given his European background, because it fits a lot of the European track mold. And, he ended up storming to the front. Scott Dixon started to come on strong there at the end, couldn't quite get the job done. They were trading fast laps at the very end there. And then Ryan Hunter-Reay gave Andretti Autosport their second driver on the podium to lead a Honda sweep. Interestingly, the rest of the top 10, just to kind of go down here, Elio Castroneves, Graham Rahal, Will Power, Charlie Kimball with a good solid run, rebounding from contact with the wall early on, Max Chilton, Simon Pagenaud, and Carlos Munoz. That's your top 10. Honestly, I think what's interesting when we take away from this race, and Chris, you might agree with this, is Joseph Newgarden. This was with 15 or so laps to go. Joseph didn't have to make that move because they were pitting. They was trying to race his teammate Will Power off a pit road to get ahead of him on the exit lane. And we know how narrow the exit lane is at Watkins Glen. He didn't quite get even close to side-by-side there on the exit lane, and he was too fast, hits the fence. Next thing you know, he gets jacked up by Bourdais in the back, and Tony Kanaan ends up kind of a part of it as well to complete a trifecta. But all he had to do was finish behind Will Power to eliminate his teammate in Sonoma. He didn't have to actually race him. So I just call this a lack of maturity and understanding the championship battle. This is the things that benefit guys like Scott Dixon and Elliot Keshnev, obviously moving into next week. But these are the things you don't see out of Dixon and things like that, and there's a reason for it. It's just they're calculated. They understand everything going in, and I think this is just something that Joseph's going to have to learn from.
When you look at what was going on at the time, trying to get out ahead of Will Power, he just let his racing instincts take over instead of, let me rephrase, a more mature racing driver, someone who's been in the sport for a few more years, would not have pushed as hard coming off the pit road as Joseph did. Although I commend the fact that he was pushing hard and was going to push hard no matter what. There are some times when you have to know, when to back off. That being said, the fact that he was still able to even finish the race in the first place was pretty amazing, given that Bourdais jacked him up pretty badly in the back. Kanaan even hit the wall there too, which I wasn't expecting. But then again, he might have been focused on the guys in front of him instead of where his car was going. But still, it was a fantastic drive from Rossi. And what was also good is that you got to see a few guys that ran up front during the race that normally didn't run up front. For a few laps there, I think it was 8 or 9 laps, Spencer Piggott ran up front because of a strategy call that they made. Jack Harvey was in the top 5 as well. And it was good to see a bunch of different guys get up there in the first place. And, of course, the bad luck of the race, it doesn't go to Joseph Newgarden. To me, it goes to James Hinchcliffe. On lap 4 or 5, to go shift from third gear, I think, to fourth gear, I went right down into first gear, which that's not a pleasant sound. I guess Richard and Gray can definitely expand on that. But when you look at this championship chase, Dixon is down right now, I think, by 3 points. So statistically, it's pretty much a dead heat. And a lot of guys are saying that, Penske having 3 guys in the top 4, they're the underdogs right now because Dixon has just been that good. But when you strength in numbers can definitely benefit you when you have 3 of the top 4 guys in the championship.
Well, I think one thing to take away from this race, though, also is because we all thought it was going to be a rain race, and some guys didn't set up their cars that way. Penske went high downforce all across the board, expecting rain, and there's a reason they were great in the corners. They were getting just dogged down the straightaways, and a lot of the Honda teams were a little bit more trimmed out. Guys like Graham Rahal were really even. Rossi said that even if it had rained, he was going to stay trimmed out because he just felt that good and that confident on the wets. So a lot of this race and a lot of the high passing we saw, is 150 passes in the race total over the 60 laps. You look at everything among 21 competitors, you look at everything, and it's a lot of that was just we didn't know which way everything was going to go. So there was an alternate with the spoilers, the rear wings, not spoilers, just in NASCAR. But there's an alternate with a lot of different variables like that. So looking forward to Sonoma, and that'll be a fun one to go to as well. There's actually going to be there's a test there this week for some people, but there's actually a test day the day before everything gets started on next Thursday. There's a 6-hour, all teams are out there. So anything you could possibly hope to extract for the weekend, we're going to get. We got 7 guys mathematically eligible for this championship heading into Sonoma. Obviously, there's some variables to play out there that we'll get into next week. But all in all, I thought Watkins Glen was a pleasant race. It made for a good show, and I'm happy I called the podium. So.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. So let's talk about Rossi for a second, okay? Rossi is a good friend of our show. We've had Rossi on our show 3 or 4 times in his junior Formula days, and we've had him on our show after his Formula One debut. We had him on our show after our IndyCar debut. He's been a great friend to the show. We were there when he won the Indy 500, but this performance this weekend is what we've been waiting for out of him. We've seen it all year long. He's gotten better and better. He's had a little bad luck here, but here's a guy who just puts up the perfect weekend. Wins the pole, leads the most lap, wins the race. Right after he's signed his contract for next year and got all that uncertainty out of his mind. Now he's got a clear mind. He knows where he's staying, knows what he's doing. think about next year, Common Aero Kit, where it's going to equalize the Chevys and Hondas a bit. I really want to say Rossi's a threat for the title next year from race 1.
I mean, technically, he's a threat for the championship this year.
Yes,
he's
he is.
still,
Yes,
I
he
mean,
is.
he's still in it.
He's still in it. Yep.
And actually, I like him for Sonoma, if I'm being honest with you. I know he probably won't win the title with all the variables coming out, but because he's like some 80 points back. But I've been saying this for a while, is that everybody's so high on Joseph Newgarden, as am I. I think Joseph is a real talent. And we've got a couple of really good young Americans in this series moving forward. And I think when you look at Rossi, you know, he hasn't had quite the same development as a Joseph Newgarden has. His was a different car, different environment, different background, social settings, etc. And now that he's getting himself acclimated to this, I mean, this is what it's going to take. Like, the future of IndyCar is going to run through these two for the next 10 or 15 years. It isn't going to run through anybody else. You talk about the Rick Mears and the Denny Sullivans. We've got kind of the new generation of that, and I think this is just the beginning of both these kids.
I think it's good too.
Exciting,
They're both American. They're both Americans, and I think this is what Rossi's 32nd start. Is that correct?
Yep.
32nd start. I mean, you know, I tell you what, you know, give him some time, get some seat time under him. I think I think the best is yet to come for him, no doubt.
Here's what's really critical about this Rossi situation that can't be undersold at all, is the fact that Jeremy Millis is his new crew chief over there, and he's got Rob Edwards calling strategy for him. A lot of that was brand new to him this year. You know, Millis was with Newgarden last year at ECR. Whenever Newgarden split to Penske, we saw the former split over to Rossi's camp, while Herta went over to Marco Andretti's pit. So you let them. I know we got a new car coming out, but that communication's good. He had said it this past weekend that they really started getting on the same page around May. Now, and we've seen them click off runs. You know, this is 3 podiums in the last 6 races. He's finished no lower than 6th in all those races. I mean, they're really starting to hit their stride. And Andretti Autosport, too. I mean, I called it before the year that I think the best driver coming into Sonoma is going to be the top in the standings would be Rossi. I know a lot of people thought it would be Hunter-Reay. We're seeing, in my opinion, a changing of the guard at Andretti Autosport, and it's starting with Rossi.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to throw out there about Rossi is he's kind of been a little bit of everywhere. You know, at the bequest of Napa, who was actually signed on for a multi-year deal to keep their name on that car in a limited role for the next couple seasons. But, you know, we saw Rossi at Watkins Glen earlier in the year at the NASCAR race, you know, with Napa and promoting IndyCar and, supporting his Napa teammate Chase Elliott.
Yep.
We saw him at the he was at the U.S. Nationals just days after winning the Glen. He was there this weekend. So Rossi is also pretty good pitchman for pretty big pretty big name in auto parts and racing. So good on him. Because the racing and winning is one thing, but being endearing yourself to the sponsors and those folks are another. And I think Rossi is really walking that line quite well. I've just seen him mature in this role, and just people say he's bland. Yeah, he is. He's a little, he's got that Formula One in him where he's a little bland. But at the same time, sponsors love him. This guy is awesome, and he's everywhere doing what he needs to do.
I can't say he's bland. I just, he's going to listen to what you have to say, and if what you have to say doesn't make any sense, he just doesn't care. And I mean, I like it, honestly. I think it's funny. He signs that deal, Napa, 100th Indy 500, goes and wins the race. Who knew? Here he signs a deal, 2 year and a half after that, roughly. Signs a deal for 10 races next year with Napa, goes and wins the race. It's awesome. We need places, companies like Napa in this sport. not a lot of people know what NTT data are. Not a lot of people can go and look at a lot of the companies that are on the side of these Indy cars and relate. And Aero Electronics, what the hell is that? I think
Fitzgerald Glider Kits.
Exactly.
They make truck parts, yeah. So there's a lot of business-to-business stuff, but Napa.
Exactly, and I think that's critical is to have them in the sport. It's who knew that this would start from a one-race deal in the Indy 500 and culminate to it's a good story. This is the kind of thing that you look for to help grow the sport, and it's only going to continue to grow moving forward if they continue to just knock doors down like this. But
that's a good point, because a company like Napa can not only marketing their driver, they will market the sport as well in all their point of purchase things and in their TV ads and things. So that's a good move, securing Napa and getting into it, because Napa will promote their driver and will promote the sport along with him.
And to kind of knock out some of the silly season stuff before we look into Sonoma real quick, part of it involving Sonoma, talking about MRTI, and Chris can probably go a little bit more in depth with some of the USF and Pro Mazda races. Indy Lights is a hell of a show in the full wet. It's phenomenal. Great defending, great passing, a lot of different line variables. It's pretty much 3 or 4 guys just trading positions for the lead, with Aaron Telitz booking in the season with a pair of wins. Kyle Kaiser's going to be an IndyCar driver next year, winning the championship in Indy Lights. He gets a guaranteed 3 starts in IndyCar, one of those the 102nd Indy 500. He hasn't said where he's going to end up yet. That's not really confirmed. I'm not going to actually put Chris into this because I don't know if he thinks this, but Yukon Coast Racing looking to go to Indy 500 next year again, looking to go full season next year. They've had 4 years with Kaiser. I think it continues personally. I can't think it goes anywhere else for him. And also other silly season stuff that's going on. Zachary Clayman DeMello, another Indy Lights driver over at Carlin, is going to be making his debut next weekend in a second car for Graham Rahal at Rahal Letterman Lanigan. So, there's 5 or 6 Indy Lights guys that are looking at IndyCar opportunities next year, but those are the 2 that we definitely know about. Obviously, Santi Rudia says he's...
And the other one is they're saying that Juan Pablo Garcia may be in a Schmidt-Peterson car at Sonoma. He's testing right there now. They may run a third car. They haven't announced that yet, but that's another Indy Lights guy who may be in an Indy car before the season is up.
Which makes no sense to me. He hasn't run it in a couple of years, I don't think.
Well, I guess he wrote a check. I don't know. It's like just an odd news story I wrote. So.
I mean, it's not as weird as what's his name at Indy, Howard.
Jay Howard, yeah.
Jay Howard, yeah, and of course, Jack Harvey, who was out of Indy Lights for a while. Now he's been back in a car. He was at the 500, and Michael's making rumblings that he's going to have a 5th team next year. Probably, my guess is with Michael Shank. I'm pretty sure the whole Alonso. I think Alonso's going to stay with McLaren. A couple news stories, so the Alonso to Andretti next year, I don't think that's going to happen. Michael's got a 4th seat to announce. He's going to announce it by Sonoma. A lot of people are saying that's Tony Kanaan. I don't know if that is or not.
I've heard Kanaan to Schmidt more than anywhere else, probably, actually.
Right, yeah, but Michael's saying he's going to announce his 4th driver at Sonoma, and he's talking like he's going to announce a 5th, which is likely with some help from Michael Shank. So we'll see how all that plays out, and we can discuss most of that next week as well.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting to see a couple of extra cars on the grid at Sonoma, with these Lights guys. And
I tell you,
and Chris, I just want to go to Chris for a second. It's just a funny thing, people were somebody. Chris, you saw the thing we're talking about. It's just like, oh man, all these. That's what you want, a bunch of foreigners in the sport. Kaiser, and I'm like, okay, you do know Kyle Kaiser was born in California.
Yes, indeed.
And California hasn't seceded from the Union yet. But he's still an American. So it's kind of funny, the name recognition of the Lights guys is not there yet in popular culture. But if you're not watching these guys, Aaron Telitz, another great American driver, So.
And what's really strange is that a fellow motorsports writer told us that in NASCAR some people give him heck for talking about Joseph Newgarden and saying, oh, he's not American. Not only is he American, he is Southern. From Tennessee,
he's from
Hendersonville, Tennessee.
Tennessee. Well, because he spells it with that F. Joseph. He must be German, but he's not.
Well, the thing is, his mother is spelled his name like that to go represent their Slavic heritage. Now, one thing I did want to bring up, speaking about Southern guys, so Team USA has their annual shootout for going for the Team USA scholarship for going to the Formula Ford Festival in England, and there's a driver there that's actually from Sulphur, Louisiana. So I followed him on Twitter. He actually would be the first driver ever from Louisiana to go to this if he manages to be one of the two drivers that wins the shootout. So for Aaron Janson, let's see if he can actually seal the deal here. Now that being said, we did have this past weekend some Road to Indy championships that got solved, moving from top to bottom. Indy Lights, Kyle Kaiser, all he had to do was start the race. I mean, the only thing that was going to stop him was having a massive voodoo doll of an engine with a bunch of pins in it, stopping him. Aaron Telitz, as we mentioned earlier, won the race. A fantastic win for him, given that his season has not been the greatest. Bilardi Auto Racing as a whole has had ups and downs the whole season. It was like a big roller coaster for them. Stepping down to Pro Mazda, they had 2 races this weekend. Victor Franzoni from Brazil did what he had to do. He won both poles. He won both races. And he probably needed this championship the most of any driver on the road to Indy that was looking for a scholarship, because he didn't have a ride this year until 3 days before the season started. And it was thanks to his teammate, Jeff Green, not the one from NASCAR, but a different guy, funding the ride for this year. And Victor said a very poignant quote in when he said he was going to get the scholarship, because he got a check for $790,000 at the banquet on Monday night. He said the Mazda Road to Indy does not just give scholarships, they give hope. And that resonated with a lot of people. Moving down to the guy that he beat, Anthony Martin, didn't walk away too bad, because as the Rookie of the Year for the championship, he gets a free Mazda passenger car of his choice. So he gets a little bit there too. Moving down to USF 2000, Oliver Askew, another American, Jupiter, Florida, won the championship by finishing second to Renus VK, which is the Americanized version of Van Comthout, a guy from the Netherlands who was a karter. And what was really interesting about these two guys is that they both were in their first full season racing cars, and they finished 1-2 in this championship, with VK scoring every race either 6th or above, and won 3 races, while Askew won 7 races this year. And another good thing about Franzoni, I'll go ahead and just bring this up, even though I'm going back up the ladder. 12 races in Pro Mazda. Victor finished second 5 times. His other 7 races were wins. And that kind of consistency wins you championships.
Oh, absolutely. So, with that being said, man, fantastic season for the Mazda Road to Indy. Hats off to all those guys. And Joey, you and I have discussed this is probably the best ladder series of any in American motorsports. But we're running out of time. But Formula One was in Monza. And, Joey, you told me last week I would be nuts to pick a Mercedes to win at Monza, but what happened?
Yeah. Good times. Lewis Hamilton won. Here you go. Is that what you wanted to hear?
Not necessarily. I wanted to hear more about the racing action and whatnot. But Lewis Hamilton did win. Yeah, so.
I mean, the weekend for me personally was a little bittersweet looking at F1, because we'll get into qualifying in a minute, but Hamilton scoring the pole broke the tie between him and Schumacher in Monza, Ferrari's home ground, which you could argue that Schumacher should have had 69 poles, since one of those was a fast lap that was taken away in qualifying. But broke it in Monza, goes, dominates, wins. Mercedes just had a 1-2 with him and Bottas. The race itself was kind of an interesting dynamic because Ferrari just didn't have the pace at all. I mean, Vettel was a distant third. And then you look at Kimi, he struggled with handling. He didn't even crack the top 5. So all in all, I think that the shine has to be on Williams and the likes of Lance Stroll and Felipe Massa. I mean, Lance Stroll had a phenomenal race, as did Esteban Ocon. I mean, he's finished in the points in almost every race this year, I think, except one. So, all things considered, the race kind of wasn't the most thrilling, wasn't the most exciting. A lot of that action was in qualifying, where we saw rain hit Q1, and 5 minutes into Q1, Lewis Hamilton could barely hold on to his car on the straight line. He's aquaplaning so much, and then like 2 minutes later, we see Romain Grosjean try to do the same thing, and he goes from one guardrail to the other, and he was out of the race. He had some very animated words to say. He was not happy with the fact that they were out there qualifying in the rain. Talked about the fact that the FIA is so concerned about safety with the Halo innovations and other innovations that are coming out, yet they're out there, racing and qualifying in the rain. That was just rampant. I mean, if you wreck in a straight line, that says something. Helmut Marko thinks that Romain Grosjean wrecks everywhere. If you talk to Helmut Marko, but what was that? 4 hours of qualifying that it got suspended by before we finally got this thing going, and then all things kind of came together for Hamilton to do what he did. We saw the Red Bull duo go 2-3, and then but because of grid penalties, it was actually Ocon that started on the front row. Lance Stroll that started on the front row with Ocon.
Yeah.
So. Good showing for Stroll and Ocon. They showed me something. A lot of talent shines in the wet, and it clearly showed for those guys. But
that was Stroll's first time driving in the wet.
Wow.
That's
phenomenal.
So,
but
that was pretty impressive.
Get your thoughts on this. Van Dorn also, before I forget, had a hell of an effort. Obviously an engine issue or power issue nailed him, but he was running comfortably in the top 10 before that happened, and he was outpacing Alonso by quite a lot. So before his engine mishap, but and I know, Richard, you'll probably, I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but I actually agree with Grosjean 100% on this situation. I thought we learned our lesson in Suzuka a couple of years ago. And I guess we didn't. I don't really know what to say. I know it wasn't a typhoon we were racing in this go around, but the rain was pretty rampant. These Pirellis were older. We're kind of a weird situation here. We hadn't run in the wets on these Pirellis before, and the first thing we're going to test them in is what was monsoon-like rain for a little while.
Yeah, it's a very difficult. You've got the FIA on one hand have an obligation to the fans and the spectators, especially the guys that, pay good money for tickets there. I mean, they may have only had a ticket for Saturday, and they want to see cars on track. But on the other hand, you don't want a scenario like we saw, unfortunately, in Suzuka a few years ago with, a guy there, having a fatal accident, basically. And they've got to play that card very, very carefully. My opinion is that these guys are the self-declared, or whatever you want to call it, best drivers in the world. They have a right foot. That they can use that right foot. If you or I don't want to go and drive on the road because the weather's too bad, we don't. There is nobody forcing their hand. You look at Niki Lauda back in the 70s when he pulled out of the race in Fuji because he thought it was too dangerous. And that's that's not to be, disrespectful to people who are concerned about their safety, but there is the ability and there is the discipline. The drivers are disciplined, and so when we lost Jules Bianchi back at Suzuka, it was a reminder that this is a dangerous sport, and Monza, especially more so than probably any other circuit in the world, is incredibly dangerous in the wet. You look at some of those high-speed corners like Curva Grande and the Lesmos and the Parabolica. They're difficult enough in the dry. It's a very, very difficult situation, but you almost want to have a tally system. You get the 20 drivers together and say, right, if you want to go out, if we get a majority, you go out. If you don't, you don't. Let them sort it out. They're big boys and big girls. Or big boys, I guess, aren't they? Yeah, anyway, yeah.
I mean, I agree, honestly. Charlie Whiting has, without question, the toughest job in all of motorsports, period. I think no matter what he does, he's wrong. The thing that scares me about this situation is the fact that we didn't take that poll, and that, I say this, and maybe this is why I was jumping so quick to the conclusion of they shouldn't have been out there in the first place. Lewis Hamilton is one of the top 3 guys probably in the world most talented, along with Alonso, and then you can put whoever, number 3. I know that's kind of up for discussion, but I look at Hamilton struggling in a straight line, and then I see Grosjean walling it in a straight line, and I start to wonder, can we just do something better with the tires? And it was said on the NBC. Go ahead.
Quickly interrupt there. I don't think. I think the issue at Monza was a unique situation in that start-finish line had been repaved. And I think if you go to like the local ice rink in Monza, that's probably got a load of tarmac down on it, and the start-finish line at Monza's got the ice rink on it. That was crazy. That they need to drain that better. They need to drain that better because I don't know if it was the sort of the sealing compounds leaking out of the tarmac which were causing the problem there. But yeah, that was the only part of the track that was really dangerous. That they were really having concerns with, I think. And I'm sure for next year that'll be looked at.
And to put it in perspective of how dangerous it was, these cars, this was reported on the NBC telecast, is each Pirelli tire, rain tire, can let out 22 gallons of water per second. So that's almost 100 gallons per car, 4 wheels going through there, and yet going through that section, they had no grip. There's something to be said for that. And obviously, every track has had their day of issues. Texas Motor Speedway. Now we can talk about Monza that way. But I don't know. Beyond that, you also have the issue, kind of sidetracking here to something that's more related that involved Haas, and is the fact that he doesn't know. A couple of years ago, it's the expectations were there and everything was suitable, and it looks like he's starting to change his stance on what they're capable of doing because he's saying with the cost and with everything else going on, I think that the realization is starting to hit him of what the modern day F1 is without customer cars and everything else going on, and then different parts, cost effectiveness that he's questioned. He's like, if we can't win in this sport, I don't see the point in being in it. And
that's the interesting question. You have to ask then. I guess you have to ask the question, why get in it? What, back in 2014, 15-ish, when he decided to invest, hundreds of millions of dollars of his money and of sponsors' money into the racing series, why did he do it? Was it as a marketing tool? Was it to win championships? Was it to encourage American drivers into Formula One on a global scale? Was it to encourage a American car manufacturer into Formula One? He's the only one that probably knows the real answer to that. So as you say, if he's turning around saying, "Well, why am I doing this?" Well, why did you do it in the first place? If he turned around, now Gene Haas has been very, very successful in NASCAR. Very, very successful in business. He's no idiot. If he turned around and 3 or 4 years ago, when he decided to invest the money and said, "I'm going to go out into Formula One and win the world championship," no, sorry, that isn't what he was thinking. It cannot have been what he was thinking.
Otherwise he's mad.
Yeah, he's just, he needs locking up and putting in a psychiatric unit if that's what he really thought. Because no, there's no way that against the might of Mercedes, who were already there, the might of Ferrari, the Red Bull juggernaut, everybody knows how much, because Haas and Red Bull are the only two manufacturers that are, or only two Formula One teams that are owned directly by a non-racing team. They are a commercial team. Red Bull went into Formula One to increase their brand awareness in Asia. And goodness me, did they do that.
I mean, in some form, the Red Bulls, the Haas, even the Williams. I mean, Williams came in as a customer car. You could argue that Privateer is customer car. It's just that they can sign a bigger check than regular customer car. So, I mean, I would dispute that claim on why we should have customer cars in the sport. Plus, it gives you a more healthy car count in Formula One. I mean, I know Michael Andretti has talked about it. It was brought up on the show. I think I brought it up last time. It's just he's talked about an expressed interest. But I guess back on point is, clearly Haas had no means of investing in having American interest in the sport, it seems like. Congratulations, you're an American team. You have a French driver. You have I believe Kevin Magnussen's Swedish, if I remember
Danish.
it. Or no, he's Danish, sorry. See, you get those mixed up. But he's got Santino Ferrucci, who hasn't done anything in GP3.
Or F2.
Or F2. And you have a chance. You had a chance to sign Rossi. I remember talking to Rossi last year at COTA, and I asked him if he was in contact with Haas. He's like, nope. I was like, 100th Indy 500 winner. The most recent American start, drove his ass off to perfection, I think, in the U.S. Grand Prix the year before against Fernando Alonso in the wet. That was one of the best drives that you could ever have hoped for in a manor, period. And it's honestly, at this point, it's insulting that he hasn't looked the direction of American drivers, because clearly there's youth and there's talent here. But if he wants to let the IndyCar series continue to have it, I'm certainly not going to complain. No. And that'll be the reason why the world can't take Americans in F1 seriously, is because even when American owners have a chance, they don't even look at our own talent.
No, it's, again, as you say, you quite rightly point out that you've sort of scratched off 3 or 4 of the arguments as to why he'd enter Formula One. He's got a pretty good deal there going with Ferrari. So he's probably, in the grand scheme of things, not looking to get an American brand as an engine manufacturer, unless, is there the possibility somewhere down the road that they have a Dodge branded engine?
Cosworth has an electric or has an engine available waiting to be badged, but that's more for the IndyCar circuit, not the F1. But
there's also talk
I kind of wonder why he moved his NASCAR team over to Ford, and I wonder if that had something to do with the Formula One, or if it's just totally non-related.
And then maybe Ford now is sort of getting cold feet on it, and then Gene has he's starting to, say, I don't know why I bother. Well, because maybe 6 months ago you knew Ford was going to get into Formula One, and now you know they're not. I don't know.
And I applaud Gene for being in F1. We need more guys like him in F1. But but I think that there has to be some realization of the expectations and the groundwork. Gunther Steiner is good. He's a great team principal, and I think they've got a great driver lineup, and I think the engineering is starting to get to the level that it needs to be. But, let's be honest. When you look at all the updates, they simply just aren't. Nobody's going to have the money throughout the season to continue the updates and the money that it takes to continue those updates outside of Ferrari and Mercedes. No, I mean, it just isn't going to happen, and that's why guys like Force India, they're only good at really fast tracks like Spa and Monza and Williams too. And whenever you go to some of these tighter tracks, some of those other Hungary with McLaren, the engine sucks. So what happens? Well, they're going to be good there because the chassis is good, and it's going to be good at tight configurations like that. So they're not going to be good everywhere. They don't have the updates to be good everywhere. Nobody does unless they are Ferrari or Mercedes at this point.
Which, in my mind, is kind of sad. You know, there was a time, and Gray's old enough to remember it, and Richard maybe a little bit, where you had 6-8 guys kept on winning every week because they were the constructors with the Cosworth engine against the manufacturers. And the manufacturer, it was Renault, Ferrari, or Alfa Romeo, and it was a pretty level playing field. And now the teeter totter has there's no level. So go ahead, Richard.
So I just want to. This is one of my big. Everybody looks at motorsport, and especially Formula One in the bygone age. I think there's a little bit of rose tinted glasses going on there, to tell you the truth. Because I actually did going back quite a few years now, a research paper on this when I was at college, looking at motorsport perspectives and how people view it. And one of the reasons why you had so many people win races had, in reality, nothing to do with how competitive the series was. It was actually that the reliability rate was so high. So low. I mean, if you had a race where the top 3 cars started the race, all finished the race, I mean, you maybe got that once a year. It was very, very common for a car to finish 10 races out of 20. The reliability levels were so low and I think that was one of the reasons why there were so many winners. I don't think it was necessarily that it was so competitive. You actually look at the spread of lap times between take a comparable circuit that's still around. The Hungaroring hasn't changed massively between when it first appeared in the mid-80s to what it is now. And there was like 5 or 6 seconds between the leading car and the 20th place car. Now it's 2 seconds between the first place and the 20th car.
I mean, so in a weird way, just to kind of bring this full circle on this show, are you saying that maybe things like Lewis Hamilton's stats and Michael Schumacher's stats and things like that are technically kind of encumbered to their talent level? Because, because of the reliability being so good.
It is very, very difficult to compare, generations of any sport, and, the cars are completely different. Even going back, 20 years to the Schumacher era, and he was starting to dominate compared to now. I mean, these are completely different beasts. So it is very, very difficult to compare. And I mean, hey, there's more races these days. So, it is difficult to do a direct comparison, but I think my personal opinion is that a lot of people that try and compare generations of racing and say, oh, it was better back in the 80s or the 70s or whenever, you need to look a little bit more than just the results. I think you need to look a little bit deeper into that.
Well, I mean, that being said, it's hard to, because people always want to compare who's the greatest Grand Prix driver of all time, right? And you get, is it Hamilton or is it, Juan Manuel Fangio?
UGE Day.
And your worlds apart there, you know what I mean?
Of course.
Let's be honest though. The best driver of any generation of all time is Tazio Nuvolari. Period. That's it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, whatever. He was okay. He was a hack. He had nothing. He had nothing on Jim Clark. So I mean, we could argue this forever, but that's the
point. Is like F1 is probably the most out of any series in the entire world. F1 is probably the most skewed when it comes to learning about who the best driver of all time is, because it's something that we'll never actually truly agree on, because it will never get answered.
Well, because the face of the sport, the cars and the engines and the combinations of those have changed so much, because you went through the manufacturer era and then the constructor era. Now we're back to another manufacturer era. So it's hard to say which driver was the best. I mean, right now I would say you could put a trained monkey in Lewis Hamilton's car and he would beat Alonso in a McLaren.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got right now it's the car. There were years that it was the driver, and there were years that it was the car. There were years that you had wildly different cars at the same time on the grid, like say in the '60s when Colin Chapman was changing the face of Formula One by introducing lighter, faster cars, but that often broke down or just fell apart and crashed. So
I think if you want to...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry. No, I think if you want to look at a comparison and play this sort of comparison game, there's only one thing that I think you can truly say is the best of any generation or any whatever it is, and that's the MP44 from the McLaren from 1988. Not only was it reliable, it was fast, it won 17 out of 18 races that season.
Absolutely,
Overrated.
yeah. Yep.
Overrated.
Well, here's the thing. McLaren was one of two teams that actually built new cars for that year because the rules were changing in such a dramatic way for the next year. So, I mean, at that point, they're racing against a bunch of year-old cars, right?
Well, yes. I mean, but you also did have the two greatest, of the greatest drivers of that generation in Prost and Senna, head to head, and I think that helped massively that these guys were they had the two best drivers as well. So I think even if they had other teams out there with a more capable car, I still think they would have been pushing teams. I mean, it's Ferrari that were second, but I mean that was a distant second. I mean, as you say, you had guys like Williams there, and they were running around in a. Did they use a Judd engine or somebody along that?
Yeah, they did. They had a Judd engine.
I mean, yeah, well, we used a Judd that year, yeah. So
they used a Renault in '99 and '89.
Yeah, I mean,
guys, we can pine about the past all night long, but I'm gonna have to cut you short, and maybe we could talk in the post race show off the air. But we are way over time. We're at what we call a green white checker, green white checker, and then a red flag, and then another green white checker because we're way over time. But had a great time talking with you all. But we're gonna have to sign off.
We're at the NASCAR Tech Center.
We're at the NASCAR Tech Center. Yep, and they're gonna take our car apart. So, before we leave the air, Formula One, are we off next week or are we racing?
Off next weekend, and then to Singapore.
So Singapore. Beautiful. So next weekend we've got Richmond for NASCAR. IndyCar is got an off weekend before the season finale. Formula One's off for Singapore. So with that being said, I want to say goodnight to all you listeners. I want to say goodnight to you, Gray, Seth, Joey, Richard, Christopher. Appreciate each and every one of you coming on the show. Enjoy talking with you tonight. But it's getting late, and Joey wants to go to bed, so good night.
Whoobazoo.com